to Leading the Way podcast, where you'll learn neuroscience-backed ways to lead more effectively and have more fun at work with what you already have. Hey there, and welcome to Leading the Way. I'm so excited you joined us today, and I'm really excited about my amazing guest, Melissa Bennett-Heinz. Melissa, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's wonderful to be here today.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So, Melissa, I'm going to tell people wonderful things about you that you know and I know, but they don't know yet. So let me introduce you professionally here. Melissa Bennett-Heinz is a licensed clinical social worker with over 22 years of specialized experience in treating addiction, PTSD, sexual trauma, childhood abuse, chronic mental illness, and mood and anxiety disorders. She's a graduate of the very prestigious Columbia University with a master's degree in clinical social work. Melissa also brings a rich background in Gestalt therapy, having completed her training at Gestalt Associates for Psychotherapy in New York City. But Melissa's journey didn't start there. She holds both bachelor's and master's degrees in oboe performance from the prestigious Manhattan School of Music, blending her deep spirituality and classical music training into her unique therapeutic approach. Today, Melissa works primarily with highly educated and successful individuals, including C-suite executives who, despite appearing to have it all together, find themselves stuck in old relational patterns, struggling with perfectionism, relationships, and codependency. She offers her clients a creative and experiential therapy experience, drawing on her diverse expertise and passions. Melissa is currently in private practice in New York, Washington, Texas, and North Carolina, where she helps adults navigate their personal challenges and discover new paths for fulfillment. Boy, Melissa, you're incredibly accomplished. Delighted to have you here today. Want to dive right in. We talked a little bit before the show today about a codependent CEO. What the heck is that?
Yeah, let's dissect that a little bit, right? I think for your listeners, they know what a CEO is, right? A chief executive officer, so a leader,
Right.
leading a bunch of people in some kind of corporate setting. What is codependency? I think this is something that is not so well described or well known. It is not a diagnosis, right? So it's not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychiatric Disorders. What it is an attempt to do, it's a theory that attempts to describe a quality in relationships. And that quality is an imbalance, right? So it's often used in dynamics of families of addiction, because in those families, like there's the identified addict, right? But that addict cannot have those behaviors and engage in that addiction that consumes their life without a lot of help. And that help generally comes from first the family of origin, right? So you have the person who's the identified addict, and it's not always extreme by any means, but this is where this explanation comes from. But you have the people around the addict who are doing whatever they can to help this person survive, right? And so essentially the dynamic of those relationships, the quality is that of an addiction. So the people who are helping the addict becomes their addiction. They will go to any lengths, right, to save them,
Right.
provide housing, give them a cell phone, let them, even if there's like some really strong boundaries, like you can't sleep in my house anymore, but they let them come and shower. Oh, they can come for dinner. Oh, they slip them $20.
So they're enabling all the time. Yeah.
And it's very co-created. And in non-addicted families, that quality and in relationships still exists, right? We do it all the time. I think one of the great examples I just have is the role of women traditionally in many societies, not just in the United States, but there are some that are more extreme where the expectation is they are the caregiver, right? They, despite any needs they might have, so when they're sick, when they're tired, they get up, they help the baby, they prepare the meal for the man to come home. And that dates back, right? That dates far back to hunters and gatherers.
Sure.
And I think that pattern is still, and that dynamic is still there with women in particular. But it's not just women, right? It's men. And where this is coming from, we have to go a little deeper. Like, how does this even happen? Where
Yeah.
this quality of what I define as an anxious attachment. So,
Mm,
one that comes from fear,
mm,
right? I'm afraid. I'm afraid you won't love me, right? There's going to be some kind of loss in this. I'm afraid you'll leave.
mm,
I'm afraid you'll think less of me. If you think less of me, you won't like me. If you don't like me, you might do this thing. And essentially, it's a place of protection of the self.
mm.
And where this starts is in infancy and childhood. When a baby has a caregiver who is not reliable, who is inconsistent, right? Who may be absent, disconnected, preoccupied, and the baby doesn't get those needs met for it could be survival, literally, right? It's
Mhm.
food, shelter, just survival. The baby is dependent on whoever that caregiver is.
Right.
And if those needs aren't met, and also for emotion regulation, right? When the baby is crying, the caregiver goes to them, picks them up, soothes them. It's okay. You're
Mm.
just hungry, or you just had, whatever the thing is, and helps them regulate
Yep.
that internal state of panic, right? With an infant screaming,
Right.
bloody murder, to they calm down, they start to
Mm.
breathe. Okay, I'm safe. I'm okay here. I
Right.
don't have to worry. Now, if a parent cannot do that for whatever reason,
Mhm.
right? They're stressed, they work, they come home, they're tired, maybe they're addicted themselves, right? Maybe the dynamics in the household are really toxic. Maybe one of the caregivers, it's common for mothers to have postpartum depression. And
Right.
depression is an inward, focused on self. I think of it as anger turned inwards.
Mm.
When you're angry, you don't want to be giving and loving, right?
Right.
It's so hard to do that. So it doesn't have to be an extreme for an infant to experience that extreme fear or panic and the need not get met.
Right.
So, this is what happens early on that kind of programs our system to be nervous,
Mm.
to be scared. And in childhood, as they develop in these family systems that are very anxiously attached, is the child will take over meeting the needs of that caregiver,
Oh,
right? So
okay.
they adjust, they accommodate, right? If dad is angry, be quiet,
Mhm.
stay out of sight, right? They learn to navigate their environment really well because they had to at one point,
Right.
right? And then if those patterns become ingrained out of our awareness, because that's what happens, right? We don't always remember what happened. In fact, we don't. In our
Mhm.
brains, we don't have the ability to remember back to when we were 6 months old or 1 years old or really
Right.
2 years old. And even if we do, we don't have the ability to process that
Mhm.
alone.
Mhm.
And that's part of development. So those things that happen to us become unconscious, become out of our awareness, but they are still stored. They are
Right.
stored. And so as we grow up and have relationships as adults, we are still operating from those unconscious patterns. We are still trying to get those needs met that were never met.
Mm.
So when you have a leader in any position, right, leading people from this anxious, scared, detached place,
Right.
trying to get their unconscious needs met, that's where they're leading from.
Mm.
So the
It's like
leadership,
they're replaying the pattern, right? Even though
exactly.
they're adult and they don't have that need anymore, they're replaying that pattern in the boardroom. Yeah.
Right. Right. Because it's out of their awareness that they even need it. Often like when these behaviors are very exaggerated and being acted out, they don't know.
Mm.
They don't know
Okay.
what's going on. they're just doing their job, right? And their job is to lead.
Right.
So, oh my gosh, I have these two people on my team and they do not pull their weight, and we have this deadline,
Right.
and they're doing enough, but really not enough for that secure leader to feel secure. So the leader jumps in, right?
Right.
I'm going to take on a portion of this project. I'm going to manage. I'm
Mm,
going to navigate. I'm going to hold a huddle. You know, I'm just going to take on that work and make sure these people make that deadline.
gotcha.
Instead of, right, if they were secure, they'd say, hey, this isn't my job to get them to meet the deadline. My job is to support them
Mhm.
in a way that allows them to show up, give them what they need to get the job done,
Right.
right? They don't need a fearful leader, just taking all the work from them. What they need is to be empowered, to be taught how, maybe they do have some organizational problems within themselves that they can't prioritize, or
Sure.
they might have a stuck point,
Right.
they might not know what to do. And if your leader, your CEO, is someone you can approach,
Mm-hmm.
someone who doesn't panic
Mm-hmm.
and coaches you through that and then lets you go, that's a healthy dynamic to do that. But unfortunately, I think so many people are in those positions, haven't done some of that work to look at what's driving them, to
Right.
understand those relational patterns. Um,
It's really interesting you say that too, because I'm reflecting on different places I've been, not to name them, but that culture of fear
mhm.
is like when you do your status reports and your readouts to upper levels, you only show the good side, right? You don't share anything where there's a flaw. Um, and then people are surprised when something blows up, right? There's not the safety to share. I'm doing really well here and I'm blowing it here and I need some help. That's not
Yeah.
usually the conversation. It's everything's great, you know.
Hmm.
And I can only imagine where that lead does that a codependent example where folks organizationally they have some sort of codependency? Is that something different?
Well, yes, if you think about what I said about taking on the emotional need of the caregiver,
Yeah.
right? Of like navigating that landscape as a young person
Hmm.
and being adaptable, being chameleon like. So, somewhere, maybe that could be part of the codependent leadership, and maybe it's within the person themselves, right?
Mm.
Where they have an anxious attachment. They are afraid that they can't really put out there what's going on. They just have to show the good stuff,
Right.
right? Because what will happen if you go in front of a group where most of the people or all of the people are just showing you how they're succeeding? How is it going to look if you're like, I'm really stuck here. I have a problem. I don't know what to do. I'm lost,
Right.
right? That's very vulnerable, very exposing.
Yep.
And really, in a corporation, you go every day and you kind of have to keep proving yourself,
Hmm.
right? There's never security really that I can make mistakes here and it's going to be okay because I am valuable here.
Right.
I think every day a lot of people go to work, especially today in our economy, right? And companies are restructuring, companies are closing, companies are merging, that they
Right.
have to go and they enter into their role in a fearful way
Right.
of what's going to happen today. And I have to show how valuable I am all the time.
Right.
And that starts with the leadership too,
Mm.
right? Because leaders that show up and aren't anxious, that support people, that don't just measure the numerics, but they have an understanding of what's driving those numerical values, what's driving the um productivity
Mhm.
is really underneath how people are feeling,
Mm.
right? And the more supported they feel, the more secure they feel, um, the higher their performance becomes, the better, and they're more improved in their work,
Right.
right? Because they're not just sitting there stressed out and anxious and worried.
Right.
When you're
Right.
calm, I'm sure, like I do my best work, I'll say it that way. I do my best work when I'm calm,
Sure.
when I'm not hungry, when I'm not thirsty, when I don't have something that I'm distracted by.
Hmm.
When that can be quieted or taken care of, right? Those needs can get met. I'm more present in the work I do with people.
Sure. Well, and as a worker to a leader, if you know that leader is engaged and actually cares, I'm way more likely, I think most people are more likely to perform better, right? And to own
Mhm.
the work more instead of, it's just the man and whatever versus we're in this together. How do I make this better? It's a different energy. I think people come to it when they feel valued, like trusted,
Yeah.
and have that
Yeah.
engagement.
Yeah. And they're hard. It's hard, right? Because the things we're talking about are the things that are not measurable.
Right.
There's no test for how people feel,
Right.
right? There's no way, um, it's intangible. And so I think corporations and people could get very lost because they don't have any way to prove that this is effective,
Mm.
right? What they can prove is our deadlines being met,
Right.
right? They can give out surveys that show if workers are engaged,
Right.
right? But it's all this stuff that drives the productivity, the immeasurables that are necessary to address in order to have higher levels of productivity. In order for corporations to be more profitable, you
Right.
have to start with those intangibles.
100%. And I'm smiling inside when you're saying that. I was at a company once where, they had those questions about how do you love being here basically? And are you treated well is what it comes down to. And then folks were rated in their bonus plan on how high that came up. So of course they were artificially nines and tens because, folks wanted that number high on their bonus. I don't know if that was purposeful or not, but
Yeah,
it was kind of poetically funny. Of course, you're never going to get an honest answer there.
right.
And then the other is leaders are often ranked on that as well. It can be instead of hey, I discovered something, we need to do something about it. It's let's find fault with this leader. They're only a 7 out of 10, and Sally's 9 out of 10. She must be doing a better job.
Hmm.
Um, you're right. We don't have a way to measure the same way. Um,
Right.
and as humans, we don't have a great long-term memory either. We remember like last quarter, maybe last year, but not
Mhm.
much further. And this is a long play, yeah, to lay this
Mhm.
in to really build
Yeah,
results.
absolutely. And it to be very mindful, like
Mm,
people who are wanting this um, dynamic or um, quality, right?
mm,
The quality of the company
yep.
feel. They have to be mindful. They have to be purposeful. They have to be patient,
Mm,
right? You need to not be so focused on what the outcome is and how much that's going to earn you.
mm,
And it's a long game.
right,
It is a long game to develop relationships that are safe and secure within a company to get to that production.
right.
And that's really hard for people,
Sure.
right? That's just really hard.
Well, and when the
Um,
good times happen, that's one thing. But then, like you mentioned before, layoffs or mergers or acquisitions, I mean, that's where that net or web of strong relationships, one, they grow, and two, you really need them. I mean, if you're sad enough to be laid off, the first thing you're going to do is reach out to your network.
mhm,
And that might include folks in your existing company, right? And they're going to remember how they were treated or not treated.
mhm.
Right. I mean, sometimes it takes that wake up call for us to realize, oh, I'm curious, do you have, without naming names, an example where you've, worked with a client or a company using your Gestalt practice? And do you have like a before and after or any kind of anecdotes there?
Oh, that's such a great question. Yes, I will just, it's so funny you said, right? Our long-term memory, not so good. Like, can I go back 3 years? Can I
Sorry, I
go
didn't mean
back
to set
five
that up.
years? No, it's beautiful. It challenges me. Beautifully, I have somebody right now that I can think of,
Okay.
right, who is a VP. I believe that's the title. I don't think that this person is C-suite yet, but sees themselves on that track.
Sure.
As a younger person, they've been with this company for a long time.
Mm.
So started as an intern, been there for over a decade now.
Wow.
Has moved up in the company very, very quickly. Got that VP title very fast.
Mm.
And this person is, I would say, anxiously attached,
Okay.
right? Codependent in being a really strong need. Started out with me as having a really strong, unaware need to fix things,
Hmm.
to be the person that has the answers,
Mm.
to be dependable, reliable, to be available, to be many things to most people. So if you come to this person, they will be able
Gotcha.
to work on it. And through recognizing how this is become a way of operating from the unknown into his awareness.
Hmm.
So it's a he. I can't always get rid of that. But has been able to set some limits,
Mm.
actually learn to say no to people, to be able to concentrate more on the task at hand, the project right now that needs to get done because there is a deadline.
Right.
To be more open with his leaders about what he needs,
Hmm.
what he wants, how he feels. And they've responded really, really well, right? Responded so well that they are supporting him and setting the boundaries
Nice.
and even developing, changing company policies.
Mm.
And that's the power. And this is one example. It's not, it won't fit every company, right? It's
Hmm.
not going to, this
Hmm.
one example can't always translate across the board like this is what you should do. But they were secure enough in the relationships already to be able to turn to the leaders, right? To
Nice.
want at least one, right? And that's a really powerful way of being in that role of
Yeah.
showing up and saying, hey, here's what you want from me. Here's the goal. And in order for me to be meeting this, and he's one person of a very small department. Without
Mm.
him, that company would be in trouble,
Mm.
right? So being able to go and be honest and take that risk and be open has
Right.
transformed not just the way he's working, but also the response of how the company is treating him.
That's amazing. And he doesn't have to carry around all that weight uh anymore, which has got to be freeing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot of
Learning,
energy.
absolutely. Learning to delegate.
Yeah.
Right. And all those things are qualities of a really good leader.
Hmm.
Right. So you have to be able to set boundaries.
Right.
And this might segue into, what are the traits of a codependent leader? But you have
Yeah.
to be able to set healthy boundaries. You have to be able to say no.
Okay.
You have to be able to delegate and walk away.
Yeah.
Let your team work,
Right.
right? You can't be the leader and be the team. It
Right.
just doesn't work that way.
Right.
And so I think a lot of the things that are paving the way to become one of the C-suite executives at that company, he's demonstrating already that he has that ability to do in a way that I don't think was really happening.
Hmm.
So it's interesting how, the way he's showing up in those relationships is actually shifting
Hmm.
the way the C-suite people are thinking.
Nice.
And it's a long game, right? He looks at this group and says, this person needs to retire. They're like
Hmm.
80,
Hmm.
right? Still coming to work. Um, and this is the dynamic this person is bringing, but things are shifting, right? Because this person will leave. This other
Right.
person is like actually another one of the C-suite executives is set to retire. So he recognizes that there's these windows where there's an opportunity
Mm.
for things to be changing,
Right.
right? And he's really in it playing the long game,
Nice.
right? And it's not, when I said that, I realized that that sounds very strategic. It is very strategic, but it's not so selfish in terms of, I just want this title. He wants to
Right.
change the way leadership is acting in this company.
Right.
Like he
No, it,
genuinely cares about how
it,
people feel.
100%, 100%. No, it
Yeah.
sounds to me, when you describe it, it sounded to me like, timing of waves and when they crash and to not honor how that pattern happens, this
Hmm.
person retiring or not, if you time it wrong, you're going to go into the reef and be really hurt.
Hmm.
If you time it right, you'll at least float over the wave or surf well. I'm not a surfer, but
Hmm.
it's being aware of the forces at play instead of
Yeah.
like getting in the ring with Mike Tyson. I'm not going to do that well. Although Mike's a nicer guy now, but why do that in the first place?
Hmm.
And being aware of it. Yeah, that sounds like being honest
Hmm. Yeah.
about situations versus if you just went up right against that person, that sounds like a lot of conflict with not a lot of result.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And the growth that I've seen is to go from this place of fear, very scripted and whatever speech he's going to give, very practiced, very thoughtful
mm,
about how I'm about to say this and what is that person going to feel,
right,
right? And it came from a place of fear to, I'm still afraid and I can show up in this way that's very courageous and open, even
hmm
though I am fearful,
that's
right?
great.
And it's beautiful, right? Because what you get out of that as a worker, what I've heard reported to me is, I feel satisfied. I
Hmm
feel happier,
hmm
right? I'm not as stressed as I used to be. I feel more valuable. Rather than trying to make every single person happy that comes to him,
Right,
recognizing that you can't do that, that's also not your job.
right,
And focusing on what is your role and what is the goal here.
nice,
And that shift has just been really remarkable to witness. Um,
absolutely. I
yeah.
would imagine too the team's loyalty, for lack of a better word, or engagement or excitement of being there shows up more, and he's
Hmm.
probably able to use his talents more.
Hmm.
He's not restricted in this. This is I can only operate in this zone like a robot, and I have to be
Yeah.
perfectly composed all the time, which is pretty much impossible. And being
Yeah.
genuine, and you're going to mess up, you're going to stumble on words. You might
Hmm.
need to apologize for something.
Hmm.
Um, I think people
Hmm.
have a lot more tolerance for leaders that show up in a more genuine, authentic way than maybe they used to. I don't have any science to back that, but just a notion that folks are hungry for that type of leader, I think.
Yeah.
Even at lower levels, not even at C-suite, at the manager, supervisor, director level.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I think that if you want to understand those dynamics really well, and a person who's done a lot of research around this, and her name is very popular, I'm sure you've heard of her, and most people listening have probably heard of Brene Brown.
yes,
She shifted her work from, um, I guess, just general population, right?
right.
Of research of studying people and relationships and shame is what her research evolved into, and applying that to working with corporate
Mm,
settings,
mm,
and going into companies and looking at how are these relationships working, what is going on, what is toxic to the functioning, and working with them to shift those dynamics.
right.
And if you read her work, or listen to any of her interviews, she will talk about the research that she's done in these settings.
Mm,
And it's, there will be your evidence. But I think what she's found is people don't want corporate leaders who are dishonest.
right,
They want honesty,
right.
right? They want authenticity. They want accountability. They want to be seen in what they're doing, not feel like they're lied to, not
Hmm.
feel like they're just another number, but they're important. And when you have a leader that can come in and say, you know what? We messed up.
Yep.
I made a mistake, right? And we're going to work on repairing this.
Yep.
And people just want honesty. I think they want the to be led in a way that it comes from a place of heart-centered authenticity,
Sure.
right? Because
Sure.
then you have a relationship built. You know who this person is. You know where you stand with them.
Right.
There's not all that guesswork that I think happens a lot in these very toxic, codependent environments that where that quality starts with the leadership.
Mm.
You have to have leaders leading from this place.
100%. I
Hmm.
was reflecting on something that a mentor taught me, and I said to my employees when I was in corporate is, if you make a mistake and let me know about it, I can help you. Like that's where all my energy is going to be.
Yeah.
And it's really the flip is true as well. If you as a
Hmm.
leader make a mistake and own that mistake, as you said so well, it
Hmm.
gives an opportunity for folks to help you. The moment you start to hide that thing,
Hmm.
we end in that shame addiction spiral, actually pretty close to it, right?
Right.
Where you really can't help them, and the person is going to do a lot of things to hide it.
Yeah.
So you have all that nefarious energy spent versus just like owning it.
Hmm.
And yes, you have to be appropriate and all those wonderful things with groups
Hmm.
and boundaries. But every time I've seen a leader do that or an individual contributor do that,
Hmm.
I had someone, a senior contributor, blow it and made a mistake, and it was an
Hmm.
embarrassing mistake. And they could have should have known better, blah blah blah. But under stress, they made a mistake, and it had
Hmm.
some financial and legal impacts to it. But I'm proud that in that moment, at least that one, we did the right thing.
Hmm.
Like we know you didn't mean to. Let's fix this thing together. And yes, we're gonna have some conversations to make sure it doesn't happen again. But it's not
Hmm.
like, blame fire this person.
Yeah.
That doesn't solve anything.
Yeah.
And it also opened up like, maybe we need some tools that do this thing because this person was doing unnatural DAX to meet a deadline. They forgot about something. They exposed some data they shouldn't have. Again, things you shouldn't do. But
Hmm.
the fact that she owned up to it, like, oh, I also know I can trust this person because if she started to hide that, like, oh,
Hmm.
here's someone that's working with sensitive customer data and they're exhibiting hiding patterns. That's going to be concerning, right? We don't want
Yeah.
folks doing that. I think it's the same.
Yeah.
It's really the same for leaders. If I messed up as a leader and did something wrong and I own that,
Hmm.
um, people have a lot of tolerance for that because they know they messed up. I'm
Yeah.
curious, these organizations, if we look at them as a being, they're pretty unhealthy, right? I mean, the
Hmm.
organization as a whole is, I don't have the right words, you're the expert here, but exhibiting codependent behaviors, like it's an enabler,
Hmm.
because of some of the cultures. Is that something you see?
Can you say a little bit more
Yeah,
about
sure.
that?
I'm sorry, I was all over the map there a little bit, but
It's
like
okay.
organization, if we think that as an entity, as a person, right? If that
Hmm.
org made up a person, the behaviors of the organization, the cultures, and written or unwritten, can sometimes enable codependent behavior, is my hypothesis. Is that something you
Yeah.
see?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. That's where corporate values, this is why it's so hard to detect
Okay.
because corporate values mask codependency.
Mm.
So that's a great question. That's just been a perfect segue. I think that we've already touched on many of these things, but haven't been super clear in defining it
Right.
and creating a picture that makes sense. So companies have these values, right? Corporate values.
Mm-hmm.
You see them on their websites and
Right.
what is their mission? What are their values? And they mask the codependent trait.
Mm.
So let me dive into that a little bit. So let's start with one of the traits of codependency is people pleasing,
Okay.
right? People pleasing, and the inability to say no. And this comes from a place to protect yourself, as we've already talked about, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the corporate value that this masks is customer service,
Okay.
um, employee engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and those are measurable, right? But the
Yep.
people pleasing is not. And so, in order to have these higher ratings or higher scores of corporate employee engagement or
Right.
good customer service, those are
Right.
measurable, right?
Right.
The people pleasing is not. So,
Mm.
what happens? They don't say no,
Mm.
right? If you provide good customer service, you don't say no,
Right.
right? You just, whatever, the customer is always right.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's value in making things right when a customer is not pleased, but I
Sure.
think there's also a realistic inability at times to make everybody happy. You can't.
Right.
It's impossible. And if you try to make all your employees happy, you try to make all the customers happy, you are going to lose.
Right. You'll be miserable
Like,
yourself. Yep.
yep, it's never going to work. Right? So that's one trait that gets masked.
Mm.
Um, we talked about this, and it's many of these kind of intersect with one another, but another trait is boundary issues,
Mm.
right? So not, let me see, how do I say this? Blurry boundaries between a codependent leader and an employee are when a codependent leader wants to make sure that employee stays happy.
Ah, okay.
Right? Don't cause them too much stress. Don't harp on them
Mm.
too much if they do make a mistake. Those blurred boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and not saying no and not setting limits with people create a sense of, here's the corporate value that it masks: we're a family.
Oh, right.
Right? We're one big happy family. We
Right.
care about you.
One big happy dysfunctional family. Yep.
One big happy dysfunctional family. And and then that also translates then over into customer service, right?
Right.
If you get good customer service, you probably didn't say no to something, right? People leave and they're happy.
Mm.
And while that's important, you're not going to do it across the board,
Right. Right.
right? So these traits become very serving on the surface. But going back again to what's underneath,
Yeah.
what drives productivity, what actually makes a corporation have a good profit margin, is when the employees are well taken care of,
Sure.
right? When things are clear, when leaders take responsibility, when
Right.
employees are allowed to make a mistake, and
Right.
it's not, going to be treated as totally punitive.
Right.
I can't tell you the number of times I got written up. I mean, the littlest things.
Yeah.
And what that did was just create in me just extreme anxiety,
Sure.
like this fight or flight response. So
Right.
my vagus nerve is totally activated,
Right.
and you're looking over your shoulder and
Right.
you're like, what can I get away with? And there's this pressured way of working. Like, I have to get everything done. So I have to stay late, or I can't take lunch, which is so unhealthy,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have a bunch, for me, um, that was a very stressful way of being in the world,
Yep.
and obviously came from a part in me that was also codependent, right?
Sure.
Out of fear that I'm going to displease the boss. Um, I got to do this. I got to make it
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. And when you're in that, when all people are in that state, right, we're closer to that base fight, flight, freeze response. We're stuck in the limbic system, and our
Yeah.
cortex, where all the magic and problem solving and innovation happens, is not
Yeah.
available.
Right.
So of course the performance won't be as good, the innovation won't be as good, the productivity won't be as good because the fear's taken over, right?
Yeah.
It has full realm of how we show up at work. And I'm
Mhm.
curious, as we talk about this, I would wonder if certain industries, like the super risk adverse industries,
Mhm.
insurance, maybe energy, finance, are going to show this even more or attract people that, fear drives the ship because there's a reward for being overly risk adverse culturally, and,
Mhm.
and certainly good natured. You want to protect people's assets, but it can be
Mhm.
overdone.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
do you see that as a pattern at all? Do certain industries have more codependency, or is it really more just about family of origin?
I think that we as people become attracted to companies for a reason,
Mm,
right? So sometimes those tangibles, the things you can measure, are safer
okay.
because it's black and white. There's a
Yeah.
sense of security people will have if they can measure something, like
Right.
energy use, right? For example, that's a really good one. And so I think people, for whatever reason, their background is, and the energy we put out, right?
Hmm.
There's a match there.
Hmm.
Something about the way that company is operating works for my system.
Mm,
So even if it's a fear-based strategy, right? Or punitive strategy or very like black and white measurable, there's something that can feel for a person really good about that,
yeah.
right? It's clear, right? I know I'm going to get sacked if I do this wrong. Um, and I think that the converse is also true. Corporations who operate this way look for people who are going to be a good fit in that environment,
Mm,
right? They're not looking for people who are free thinking,
right.
confrontational. They think outside of the box, more creative. They want people who are going to follow orders,
Right.
right? So there becomes a really good match then in the way that it meets the corporation's needs, and it also meets that person's probably unconscious out of awareness needs of feeling safe in the world. Safe
Right.
in air quotes because it's a false sense of safety.
Oh, it's brittle, right? Because it's all
Mhm.
compliance and the
Yeah.
world's gonna change. It always changes, things change. And so you're just
Yeah.
stuck in this compliance with no resilience or very low resilience. So you're ripe for disruption. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting too, because you named, several different sectors.
Yeah.
Well, I found that numerics,
Mm.
metrics are rampant in healthcare too,
Oh, sure.
right? So driven by HMOs and Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, CMS guidelines
Yes.
that, there's a certain amount that's going to get paid for
Hmm.
this service,
Hmm.
right? For this act. And you have to maximize that.
Right.
So for the number of years, and this happened at every company I worked for,
Yeah.
and inpatient hospitals. So when you don't see what goes on the back end, right? Every morning, we had a physician advisor. He was an administrator. He didn't practice medicine anymore, but he would come around to our unit. We're all assigned a unit, enormous amount of beds to be responsible for one person.
Mm.
Your goal is only as one of those support workers, as like a case manager or a social worker in a hospital setting, your only job is to get that person out.
Mm.
So anything they need, anything that's going to impede their discharge on this date, because this is the estimated length of stay, this is what we
Right.
expect them to be here, of what the insurance company we know is going to pay for.
Right.
And we won't have to waste more time trying to do request for more days, send in more paperwork, appeal to the insurance company.
Yep.
If a patient stays longer in a bed and you get denied, you lose a lot of money for one bed,
Right.
right? So anyway, this physician would come around and he'd be like, he'd look at his length of stay list And anybody who was above the 4.15 ELOS, estimated length of stay, on
Mhm.
that unit, he'd say, why is this person here?
Mm.
Why is this person here?
Mm.
Why, when are they leaving? What is the discharge plan? What's
Wow.
going on? What do you need to get them out of that bed?
Wow.
And I'm not kidding. That's what drove the care.
Yeah. That's
Money,
crazy.
the bottom line, insurance companies,
Yep.
right? And I worked for an insurance company as well that I have to share this because
Sure.
this is so alarming. This is so alarming. This particular insurance company was behavioral health care, managed care. And what this company did was manage a portion of another insurance company's benefits.
Okay.
And what this company managed was anything under the umbrella of behavioral health, also known as mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So these companies, let's just use a couple of examples. Emblem, right? Do you know of Emblem? Have you heard of Emblem?
Yes.
Or we can call it, okay, fine. Emblem said, it is not worth us to manage this portion of our plan. We're going to hire this company over here and hand that work to them.
Okay.
And they are going to take care of this for us, right?
Probably for cost
Emblem,
reasons, right?
and
Yeah.
Emblem says, we're going to pay you, I'm going to just throw out random numbers. We're going to pay you $1 million for this year to manage this part of the benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Out of that $1 million we're paying you up front, you're going to pay all the claims that come in.
Okay.
Right. So a person goes to inpatient psychiatry unit because they are suicidal,
Mm-hmm.
depressed,
Mm-hmm.
need to be admitted because they're a danger to themselves.
Right.
This company I worked for authorizes that admission, pays the claims out of their own pocket.
Mm-hmm.
So the faster that person is out,
Right.
the less admissions they have, the more of that $1 million they keep.
Yikes.
Also managed another plan where they managed the plan, but they didn't pay the claims themselves, right?
Mm.
The company still paid on all the claims, but the company managed all the paperwork, did all the reviews, managed all the approvals. So I am not kidding when I share with you that if there was any kind of question about whether or not a patient should be admitted
Mm-hmm.
or have a continued stay, the first question I would get asked is, what plan is this?
Right.
If it's an Emblem plan and we were going to be paying for it, deny it.
Right. Yeah.
Deny it. Let them appeal it.
Yep.
They can talk to a doctor.
Right.
If it was GHI and it was like on the border, or the hospital didn't get together to get the discharge plan together in time, or there was something that impeded it on their end,
Mm-hmm.
give them another day
Right.
because we're not paying for it.
Right.
And that was what it was about. It literally was about, are they a danger to themselves, a danger to others, or will they die?
Right. Wow.
That severity.
Right.
So what happens in the middle there, right? Like for the members, what happens to the impact of the care they're able to access when
Right.
you have a company that's looking at only the number, right?
Well,
So
and
the
and not
patient
all
care
the
is
numbers,
gone.
right? The families around them suffer.
Oh
The
yeah,
readmit rates are higher when you treat it like a supply chain, right?
exactly.
They're looking at this number, but not the whole picture
Right.
of things going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and they dictate care. They
Right.
say to hospitals, this is what they were discharged on and they were stable. We want them started on all of this medication again. We're going to give you 1 day and you have to come back to me tomorrow and tell me that your doctor has that order and they are taking
Wow.
it.
Wow.
Yeah. And it is like that. And that is no exaggeration. So here I am, the middle person.
Yep.
Here I am, the social worker. I entered that field for a reason, right? Because I care. I believe in those social work values. I believe that people who don't have need to be cared for, people who can't do for themselves need assistance. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're people, they're humans. And I have a company who's telling me it's just about the bottom line, but I'm in the middle hearing the story.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle hearing the symptoms and how this person is presenting and what is going on, because I need a clinical picture to tell me to a degree a level of suffering.
Mm.
And I'm listening to this and I have a heart.
Right.
I access my emotions. I've been in therapy a long, long time. I started when I was young. I hope I never have to leave. Like I love that
Yeah.
relationship and I love the opportunity to just look at what's happening for me.
Hmm.
That was so hard.
Yeah.
It was so hard to like navigate being in that position. And in some ways, I really loved it. Like in some
Yeah.
ways, I'm like, I'm going to go talk to my doctor and I'm going to do what I can to advocate for this person to get what they need.
Yeah.
I want to hear how severe is it? And I knew what to ask for. Like if a person was going into detox, I
Mm.
need your vitals. I
Yep.
have to know what those vitals are because that tells me a part of their picture. What does their mental status look like? Are they suicidal? Are they severely depressed? Do they have a home? Do they have a support system? Because
Mm.
I needed my case to look bad,
Right.
right? Because that's my role. Like as a social worker, it wasn't about the money,
Right.
right? It's about caring for people.
Right.
And I'll say that was a struggle for me being there. And at
Sure.
the same time, I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved that I was able to be the person that showed up in that job and cared.
Right.
Like I never stopped caring.
And champion people that really don't have a champion, right? I
Yeah,
mean, or currently don't. Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
It was tough. I fought a system, but that's just what I do. I always fight systems,
Right.
which is probably how I found, like we talked about how we get matched.
Yeah.
Right? I got matched very well in a lot of ways in my field,
Right.
because I really believe in advocacy for people. I really
Yeah.
believe in taking care of, that's really important. Like we don't function without it. We
100%.
need people to care for us. We need people to provide food, right? Because
Yeah.
we're not farmers anymore.
Right. Right.
We need people to give us medicine when we're sick.
Right.
And we don't have a voice. We need someone to have a voice.
Sure.
Yeah, so that was a long story, but it's really just amazing to me how we forget. People forget, like we're so disconnected from ourselves,
Right.
from our authentic selves.
100%.
And we
And the
forget
go-to is,
why.
yeah, we do forget why. And the go-to in the business world seems to be to go to this conveyor belt mentality. Everything's like a manufacturing floor. And not everything is, even in business, is a manufacturing floor, right? There's some great
Mhm,
gains there, and Six Sigma and all that makes tons of sense. But
mhm.
human beings and their well-being and health is not that.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the time to really go, and I'm not a specialist in this place, so I'm talking out of turn,
Mhm.
but my belief would be is you don't have the ability to really go to source from a psychological perspective or just a physical health perspective,
Yeah.
they're going to keep coming back, right? And the meds that
Mhm.
are get pushed on them probably aren't going to move the dial in the long term, maybe in the short term,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
It
we don't
creates a
run the blood tests they
really
need because they're too expensive. And
right.
wow, this person has a zinc deficiency, and all they need to do is take zinc as part of the mix, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm. Yeah, and it can just be really simple things that companies don't find value in investing in, like
right,
testing vitamin levels, like, right? So if it's that simple as a vitamin deficiency, that we need vitamins and minerals to function optimally. We're machines,
right,
right? Like any machine needs certain things to run well.
yeah,
And when you deprive a machine of an essential, there's going to be a breakdown,
yeah,
right? The system won't function anymore. Eventually the machine will just break.
yeah,
So, it's interesting because, like with energy, we're talking about healthcare, but what does energy do? Right? Energy powers
everything,
um, everything.
yeah,
Some type of energy, whether it's oil or electric, it doesn't matter. And electric doesn't run without oil.
right.
We don't have electricity. How do people think food gets delivered?
I don't think they do. But
right? They forget like it's actually
yeah,
grown in
it's a
dirt
chore to go to the
somewhere
grocery
and
store, but they don't realize all the work that, puts it right in front of us.
right. And then small scale, once you get that food, how are you going to process it or cook it for yourself at home? Like you need energy. It's not a
Right.
luxury.
Right.
It's not a luxury. Yet the energy company that supplies where I am just, I mean, astronomically expensive.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, New York City was cheap
Yeah.
in comparison to this.
Right.
And they just raise their rates for no reason.
Yeah.
And what are people going to do? Like that, and I think the corporations like don't understand at all the human suffering that's going to happen,
Right.
right? These extreme temperatures that we're seeing. And people, I often like, I feel so fearful for like people who are vulnerable, who
Mm.
can't pay for their electricity,
Right.
right? They don't have an air conditioning and it's 110 degrees. Like you'll die.
Right.
Like you'll die. You know, if you're older, if you're sick, even people who are healthy, like we need to be able to regulate our temperatures.
Right.
So I think companies miss. It's interesting. I have a company that I have a fiber optic internet,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
Coming to where we live. Thank God, because we get a lot of storms and a lot of issues. And they're the only company that didn't raise their rates, but also actually lowered them. They
Wow.
said, we
That's unusual.
recognize, yeah, we recognize that times are hard
Right.
and we're lowering the price of all of our packages across the board. They lowered it and it has stayed at that lowered rate.
Right.
I mean, I want to say for 2 years now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every other thing I have to purchase, like who can live without a cell phone?
Right.
Who?
Not in this economy, not in the
Right?
Western world. Yeah.
Like it's
Right.
really hard to even contact a doctor. Like you have to do it through a portal. You have
Right.
to be able to, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yep.
But my cell phone bill is astronomical and compared to just my internet use,
Yeah.
right? The internet is like the power I get
Right.
to be able to communicate, but I have to have a device to do it and I have to have electricity to charge it. So it's just there's such a disconnect, I think, in how
Oh,
we're
100%.
functioning.
Yeah, I mean that's a
You
whole other
know,
podcast, but the
that's a
sustainability of our
yeah.
economy is we're run by the Fed, which is 12 banks, and what banks want to do is keep you in debt. So surprise, surprise, we're all in debt, including the country. But that's a whole other podcast.
That
But
is a fascinating topic when you understand
yeah,
what money actually is, how interest works, how
yeah,
banks work, how all of this works,
yeah,
what the Federal Reserve is.
right.
It's
It's stunning.
mind-boggling. It's stunning.
And talk about codependency.
And talk about not being authentic. Talk
Oh,
about disingenuousness.
right.
Talk about actually selling you a story that isn't even true and we
Not even close.
believe it.
Right, right.
You know, I had a teacher that would say all the time to me, the cheapest resource of a nation is education. He would rip over and over to the point
Mm.
where you're always just like rolling your eyes, like, I know, I know. But he was right.
Yeah,
Right. You know, people are uninformed, uneducated, stressed out, scared. Let me just pay my bill because I don't know what to do.
yeah.
And
So
it's
good.
just so hard. Like, yeah, we are a very codependent society
We are.
when you understand how that works,
We are.
you know, on
Well,
every level.
yeah. Well, Melissa, I'm glad you have skills to help us get out of that as leaders and choose a
Mm.
different path. For folks listening in that want something different and are now aware that they're a codependent leader or they're in a company that's codependent, how do they reach out and engage with you to do something different?
Yeah, you can find me. I have a website,
Okay.
melissabennettheinz.com. It's my full name. Um, I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook. Just type in my name, Melissa Bennett-Heinz, and you can easily find me. But you can find me on my website. I have a inquiry page that you can go to and fill out and connect with me. And you know, I have some interesting stuff on my website. I'm very proud of that. It's very open. The work I do requires me. I am the instrument,
Mm,
right? And so I wanted to be very open about my story and how I came to this work and what I do in the work I do. So, if you don't want to contact me, that's fine, but it would be nice for you just to visit, just check it out. I have some blogs on there you can read.
Nice, nice. We'll put those in the show notes. So if
Great.
you're on a jog or a commute or something like that, please don't hurt yourself. You can check it out when you get home on your
Yes.
phone, wherever you are. And Melissa, thank you so much for being on Leading the Way. Before I close out, something I ask every guest, I'd love to know something you're thankful or grateful for today.
That's a beautiful way to end. Right now, in this moment, I feel very grateful for connection.
Mm,
Like I feel grateful for relationships.
nice. That's beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Melissa, for all of our friends listening. Would love to have a like and subscribe and all those things. But more importantly, if you have a friend that you know this message would help, share it with them. It's one of the most loving things you can do. And, sometimes that little message has a bigger impact than you even realize. So keep leading the way. Thanks so much for listening in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Leading the Way podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss other great episodes like this one. And if you're ready for more in your workplace, be sure to go to aintent.com. You'll find lots of free tools, assessments, and ways to engage directly with us to get your own epic results. We'll see you there.